We're pouring billions, actually trillions of dollars into education every single year. But are we putting that money where it really counts? That's the big question we're tackling in this explainer. We're going to follow the money to figure out what a truly effective education system actually looks like. So let's start with a puzzle, right? A real paradox that gets this whole thing going. We've got more graduates walking around with diplomas than ever before in history. But in so many countries, a shocking number of them can't find a job. You've got all this investment, all this time and money poured in for what seems like very little return. It really makes you wonder, is the system itself just broken? Okay, so to really dig into this, we need to change how we think about success in education. Let's forget about just counting how many people are enrolled or having diplomas or hanging on walls. The real measure, the thing that actually matters, is employability. It's that simple. Is school actually giving people the skills they need to land a job and, build a life? All right, so this leads us to the first big clue in our investigation. It's this feeling, this growing sense for so many people that education's promise of a better future, well, it just feels kind of broken. The World Bank has a phrase that just nails this problem perfectly: schooling without learning. Think about what that means. The schooling part is easy. Kids are in the building, sitting in classrooms. But the without learning part, that's the kicker. They're not actually picking up the critical skills, not the academic ones, not the social ones, not the technical ones they're going to need. Let's look at a real-world example. In places like Uganda and Zambia, they went all in on universal primary education. And hey, enrollment numbers shot through the roof, nearly 100%. Looked like a massive success on paper, right? But there was a catch. The quality of that education took a nosedive, and a lot of kids ended up dropping out anyway. So they got the schooling part down, but the learning, not so much. So, if just packing classrooms isn't the solution, then where should the money be going? And that brings us to our second big clue, this huge ongoing debate around the world about where to actually spend the cash. Okay, so you've basically got two main camps here. In one corner, you have a lot of developing nations saying, look, our resources are tight. We've got to focus on the basics, getting everyone through primary and secondary school. But then, in the other corner, you have a bunch of developed nations doing the total opposite. They're pouring a ton of money into higher education, colleges and universities. We're talking two completely different game plans. Now, the idea of focusing on the basics, it's got some serious backup, at least in theory. Check this out. This is the Heckman curve. And what it shows, in a nutshell, is that the biggest bang for your buck, the best return on investment you can get, comes from spending on early childhood education. I mean, it builds the foundation for everything else that comes later. Kind of makes sense, right? But, and this is a big but, here's where it gets complicated. You look at countries like Germany and Sweden, they spend a ton on higher education, doing the exact opposite of what that curve seems to tell us. And guess what? They have some of the lowest unemployment rates for graduates on the planet. So clearly, there's more to this story than just one simple graph. And that very complication points us to our third and maybe most important clue. And that is this massive, glaring gap between what students are learning in school and what employers in the real world are desperately looking for. Just look at Indonesia. This chart is pretty eye-opening. It's showing that unemployment is actually rising for graduates from vocational schools. Now think about that. These are the schools literally designed to make people job-ready. Even the programs that are supposed to be the most practical are falling behind what the market actually needs. And believe me, this isn't just an Indonesian problem. Not at all. A huge survey in the European Union found that, get this, 47% of employers said they just couldn't find graduates who had the right skills. Almost half. So this isn't about not enough money being spent. It's about what it's being spent on. It's a relevancy problem. Okay, so let's recap. We've got schooling without learning. We've got this confusing debate about where to put the money. And we have this giant skills mismatch. So what on earth is the solution? Well, it turns out there might be a kind of middle way. And for a great example, we can look to Germany. Germany's dual apprenticeship system is, frankly, brilliant. It's all about integration. Here's how it works. First, the industries themselves don't just sit back and wait for graduates to show up. They're involved in designing the curriculum right from the get-go. Then, students split their time. Part of the week, they're in the classroom learning theory, and the other part, they're getting paid hands-on training at a real company. And get this, the people teaching them are often experts from those very industries. It completely closes that gap between theory and reality. And the result is pretty amazing. Graduates walk out with skills that employers need right now. When you see a model like that, it really makes you step back and rethink the whole question, doesn't it? Maybe that whole debate we started with, primary versus higher ed, maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. Because at the end of the day, it's not really about picking a side, primary versus tertiary. The smartest investment, it seems, is in building a connected system. A system that has this constant conversation happening between the world of education and the real-world economy. That way, what's being taught in the classroom is always in sync with what's actually needed on the job. And so that leaves us with one final thought, a question for you to take with you. Let's forget about the usual metrics for a second. Forget enrollment numbers. Forget fancy university rankings. Just look around your own community, your own country, and ask yourself a simple question. How well is our education system really preparing people for the world as it actually is?